When Africa remembered Zion, it was not just a memory of place, but a stirring of the soul, a whisper of ancient paths, a pulse that had been silenced yet never truly died. The Igbo, a people whose roots stretch like sacred rivers through the heart of Africa, carried within them a history that many tried to erase, rewrite, or bury beneath the sands of time. They were scattered, their stories torn apart by trade winds of slavery, by colonial chains, by the merciless march of empires that thought themselves eternal. Yet, as the centuries passed, a truth began to rise like the dawn, a truth that no empire could hold back forever. It was the truth of identity, the echo of a homeland once connected to Zion, the cradle of a people whose memory is their inheritance. This is not a tale of religion nor a cry of myth, but a call to remember who we were before the world told us who to be. For too long, the story of the Igbo has been framed by outsiders, spoken by tongues that never carried their rhythm, written by hands that never bled their pain. But now, the pages turn once again, and we find ourselves looking into the mirror of history and asking, what was lost when Africa forgot Zion, and what is found when we remember? The story of the Igbo is a story of resilience, one of the most profound testimonies of endurance ever written by human hearts. Torn from their homelands, their villages burned or broken, their names twisted by slave masters, their gods mocked, their traditions demonized, they still endured. Across the Atlantic, their presence shaped the soil of new worlds. In the Caribbean, in the Americas, in the hidden corners of Brazil and the silent bayous of the South, you can hear their songs if you listen closely, songs of resistance, of survival, of an unbroken spirit. The world often forgets that many revolutions of freedom, many uprisings against oppression, carried the heartbeat of the Igbo within them. Their concept of community, their fierce independence, their belief that no man was born to be less than another, these became sparks that ignited flames far from their homeland. But what is Zion in this context? Zion is not merely a mountain nor a city. It is a symbol of origin, of belonging, of that sacred place where a people first knew who they were before history scattered them like chaff in the wind. For the Igbo, the idea of Zion represents an ancestral memory, a connection to ancient Israel that has been whispered through generations, through proverbs, through names, through customs that mirror those once practiced along the Jordan and the Nile. The circumcision of children on the 8th day, the reverence for one Creator, the ancient laws of purity, the tribal marks that once spoke of belonging, these are not coincidences. They are threads of an ancient fabric, frayed but never fully torn apart. And now, in the age of information, as walls of deception crack and archives reveal their secrets, more are awakening to the realization that the story of the Igbo is not a footnote, it is a chapter of the world's heritage. Yet why does this matter? It matters because a people without memory is a people without direction. History is not just the past, it is a map. When Africa remembers Zion, it does not mean retreating into nostalgia, it means reclaiming the compass that was stolen. It means telling our children not only where we have been, but who we were before the world branded us with chains. The Igbo, like many tribes across Africa, were made to forget that they were not simply products of colonization, they were builders of civilizations, traders across deserts, poets of the drum, mathematicians of the calendar, healers of the earth. They were people who had laws before foreign constitutions, who had councils before parliaments, who had trade routes before borders. When you erase that from a people's mind, you weaken their future. When you restore it, you awaken giants. The forgotten roots of the Igbo remind us that slavery was not just a physical bondage, it was a mental dislocation. Ships carried more than bodies, they carried away names, lineages, sacred songs. Colonization did not only seize land, it sought to plant foreign trees in the soil of memory. But here is the miracle. Memory is like a seed. Even when buried deep, even when trampled upon, even when denied sunlight, there comes a season when it stirs, breaks the ground, and reaches for the sky. Today, that seed is sprouting again. Through DNA research, through oral traditions being documented, through elders breaking the silence of shame, through youths asking questions their ancestors were punished for asking, Africa is remembering Zion. The Igbo are piecing together their mosaic. They are seeing how their story fits within the grand story of human migration, of ancient kingdoms, of lost tribes and found nations. Let this speech be a call to those who think their history is gone. It is not gone, it is waiting. It is waiting in the names your grandmother whispered, in the rituals you thought were mere superstition, in the stories that the elders told at night when the moon was high. It is waiting in the songs sung at births and burials, in the markets where proverbs trade like currency, in the way your people bury the umbilical cord of a child in the soil of home. These are not meaningless customs, they are. The Igbo knew this, that heritage is not always written in books, it is woven into the fabric of living. When Africa remembers Zion, it does something more than honor the past. It heals the wound of displacement. For the Igbo, who live scattered across the world, from the streets of London to the shores of Jamaica, from the cities of America to the villages of Abia and Anambra, this remembrance is a bridge. It is a bridge between the old and the new, between the ones who left and the ones who stayed, between the voices of the ancestors and the dreams of the unborn. It tells them, you are not a people defined by slavery, you are a people interrupted by it. You are not a people created by colonization, you are a people who survived it, and survival is not the end goal, revival is. What then is the responsibility of those who hear this truth? It is to carry it forward, not as a weapon of hate, but as a torch of understanding. The world does not need more division, it needs more roots, for when a tree knows its roots, it can weather any storm. The Igbo, by reclaiming their forgotten roots, offer the world a lesson in how identity can be both ancient and modern, how pride can be both humble and powerful, how memory can be both a burden and a liberation. To the young Igbo child growing up in a world that tells them their story began with chains, let this be a reminder, your story began with crowns, with councils, with a code of honor that predates your oppressor's history book. To the African in diaspora, weary of searching for home, know this. Home is not only a land, it is a lineage. When you remember Zion, you begin to rebuild it. The time has come for Africa to stop begging for validation from those who once erased. The time has come for the Igbo and their brothers and sisters across the continent to stand not as fragments of forgotten tribes, but as custodians of a legacy that predates the maps of the modern world. This remembrance is not about superiority, it is about restoration. It is about standing in the marketplace of nations and saying, we too have contributed to the human story and our chapter is far from over. The echoes of Zion are not faint, they are growing loud. They call us to rebuild economies based on cooperation, to revive languages silenced by colonial classrooms, to write our own textbooks, to film our own histories, to teach our children the names that were stolen. There will be resistance, as there always is when truth rises. There will be those who mock, who distort, who fear what a self-aware Africa might mean for the balance of global power. But truth does not need permission to exist. It needs courage to be spoken, and this is that hour of courage. The same spirit that led the Igbo to resist oppression in the plantations of the Caribbean, to revolt in Haiti, to establish thriving trade before the slave ships came, that same spirit is alive now. It whispers to every African soul, remember not to dwell in sorrow but to rise in strength. Remember not to divide but to unite. Remember not as a chain to bind you to the past, but as a key to unlock your future. When Africa remembered Zion, the world will not merely look back, it will have to look forward differently. For a people awakened cannot be easily enslaved again, neither in body nor in mind. And when the Igbo remember who they were, they help the whole of Africa remember who she is. A mother of nations, a fountain of wisdom, a cradle of civilization. This is the call of our time, to remember not as an act of nostalgia, but as an act of power. Memory as liberation is a force that moves far beyond the act of simply recalling what once was. It is the act of breathing life back into what was taken, stolen, silenced, or suppressed. And in doing so, it becomes a weapon against ignorance and a pathway toward true freedom. When a people remember, they do not only look backwards with longing, they begin to understand the patterns that shaped their suffering and the strengths that allowed them to endure it. For too long, the memory of Africa, and especially that of the Igbo people, was deliberately broken, scattered like seeds in a storm. Not so they could grow elsewhere, but so they would forget where they first took root. Colonizers, slave traders, And imperial architects knew that the easiest way to control a people is to sever their story from their soul, to make them believe that their worth began with chains, or that their identity began at the moment their oppressors recorded their names in foreign books. But memory is stubborn. It resists erasure. It waits in fragments. Songs whispered at night, proverbs spoken under breath, scars on the land, rhythms in the drum. Names passed from generation to generation even when the language around them was forbidden. When those fragments are gathered and stitched together, they form something greater than nostalgia. They form a map, a guide, a reminder of who we were before the world told us who to be. That is why memory is liberation, because to remember is to reclaim choice, to see oneself not as a product of oppression but as a survivor of it, not as a leaf blown by history, but as a root that endures beneath the soil. Liberation begins in the mind, and the mind cannot be freed if it does not know what chains it wears. When the Igbo remember their ancient customs, their early laws, their migrations, their crafts, their wisdom, they are not simply engaging in history, they are unlocking the doors to a future where they do not have to ask permission to exist fully. They begin to teach their children the truth that they come from builders of cities, that they carried knowledge across deserts, that their ancestors signed treaties before the ink of colonial rule was ever spilled on a map. Memory allows the diaspora scattered across the globe to find one another again, not through the borders of modern nations, but through the echoes of ancestry. It allows the woman in Jamaica, the man in Brazil, the child in London, the elder in Anambra to recognize the same rhythm in their pulse, the same proverb in their grandmother's voice, the same reverence for land and lineage. This is why memory is feared by those who profited from amnesia, because a people who remember are a people who will not be easily controlled again. They will not be told their languages are useless. They will teach them. They will not be told their past is shameful. They will honor it. They will not be told they must assimilate to matter. They will stand as themselves and still matter. Memory becomes the first stone laid in rebuilding a bridge to dignity, to unity, to strength. It is the fire that lights the path for generations to come, a reminder that freedom is not given, it is reclaimed, and the first step of reclamation is remembrance. The Igbo is a symbol of African resilience, represents far more than a single tribe's story. It is a living testament of what it means for a people to be pressed, torn, scattered, yet never erased, never completely broken, never truly silenced. Their history is a mirror through which the entire continent can see how strength is not only measured in battles fought, but in the spirit that refuses to die even when the world conspires to suffocate it. The Igbo were uprooted from their lands, dragged across oceans, sold into servitude, stripped of names, mocked for their customs, punished for their independence. Yet they carried within them something that no whip, no chain, no colonial law could extinguish. That something was a fierce insistence that they were not born to crawl. It was in the way they formed communities in places meant to destroy them, the way they preserved songs in the middle of plantations, the way they whispered their identity to their children when speaking it aloud meant pain. Across centuries of trade and terror, their imprint shaped lands they never asked to inhabit. In the Caribbean, they became farmers and merchants. In the Americas, they became the heartbeat of rebellions. In Brazil, they infused their essence into the soil of the sugar fields. In distant shores, they rebuilt fragments of home in hidden corners. Their resilience is not just a matter of surviving physical suffering. It is the refusal to let oppression define their future. It is the courage to reinvent, to adapt, to find new expressions of self without abandoning the core of who they were. Even in the face of colonial policies designed to divide them, to turn clan against clan, to rewrite their history as primitive or chaotic, the Igbo kept trading, kept educating their children, kept building structures of governance and law in secret or in plain sight, depending on what the times allowed. They valued learning so deeply that even when foreign rule banned their methods, they created new paths to teach. They valued freedom so fiercely that in the age of slavery, their name became linked to defiance, to uprisings, to those who would rather leap into the sea than live in chains. Resilience for them was not passive endurance, it was active resistance, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, but always there, shaping the narrative that the world tried to deny. And this resilience has echoes today in the traders who cross borders and still thrive, in the thinkers who build universities and industries, in the artists who tell stories that reach across oceans, in the youth who search for their roots and find pride instead of shame. To call the Igbo a symbol of African resilience is to recognize that their history is not isolated. It reflects a pattern seen across the continent, but carried with a particular intensity that cannot be overlooked. It is to acknowledge that resilience is not only a matter of physical survival, it is cultural, intellectual, spiritual, and communal. It is the ability to carry memory through storms, to carry dignity through centuries of insult, to carry vision through generations of attempts to blind them. And perhaps most importantly, it is the reminder that resilience does not mean accepting suffering as destiny. It means refusing to allow suffering to define the boundaries of your identity. It means rising again and again, building again and again, dreaming again and again, even when the world has given you every reason to forget how to dream. Zion as a symbol of origin and belonging has always carried a weight far greater than mere geography. It is not about a single hill or a single city marked on a map. It is about the essence of where a people first understood themselves, where their story first took shape, where their heartbeat was in rhythm with their land, their ancestors, their language, their customs, and their destiny. For the Igbo, this idea of Zion is a memory that has lingered in fragments of rituals, in the cadence of names, in the laws of kinship that survived the long dark night of colonization and slavery. It is not about laying claim to a distant capital or staking borders upon sacred land. It is about remembering that once there was a place, a time, a way of life where identity was whole, where no foreign power had redrawn the boundaries of their existence, where belonging was not questioned because it was lived in every gesture, every festival, every transaction, every covenant made between man, between man and the earth, between generations yet unborn. This Zion is the original root from which their branches stretched, the original fire from which their lamps were lit, and those centuries of upheaval have tried to snuff out that flame. It flickers still, waiting for the winds of remembrance to feed it. To speak of Zion in this sense is to speak of a homeland of the soul, a cultural and ancestral anchor that does not vanish when a person is displaced, because it is carried in the way they raise their children, the way they bury their dead, in the way they mark time and tell stories and choose names that mean more than sound. It is the reason why, even in distant lands, the Igbo preserved a sense of themselves that puzzled their captors. It is the reason why, when stripped of everything, they still formed communities with the same respect for elders, the same patterns of trade, the same instinct to gather and decide together rather than bow to one voice. Zion is belonging that transcends walls. It is the knowledge that your people come from a lineage that was ordered, purposeful, creative, and ancient before anyone wrote about it. When you know your Zion, you do not spend your life wandering without a map. You move through the world with a compass hidden in your chest. For the Igbo, remembering Zion is not about turning back the clock to live exactly as before. It is about carrying forward the dignity that once defined them, the sense of community that once guided them, the laws that bound them together, even without prisons and chains, the music that told their history before books recorded it. It is about saying to the scattered children of that lineage, you are not just descendants of survival, you are carriers of a sacred blueprint that connects you to your ancestors and to each other. And for all of Africa, this symbol of Zion stands as a reminder that belonging is not given by colonial borders, by passports, by the lines drawn in Berlin conferences. Belonging is a deeper root that predates those maps, that calls a person back to a sense of being whole even if they live in a foreign land. It is a call to heal the wound of exile by restoring pride in origin, by reviving languages and names, by telling the stories that make a child stand taller because they know their people were not born yesterday, they were part of a great river of time. Zion is the quiet force that allows a people to rebuild not out of envy for another's empire, but out of memory of their own greatness, a greatness that was communal, agricultural, spiritual, intellectual, artistic, long before their history was interrupted. To reclaim Zion is to reclaim the right to define yourself, to stand in the present with a past that strengthens you instead of a void that weakens you, to teach the next generation that they come from somewhere, that they are not drifting leaves but branches tied to a living root. and that no matter how far the winds of migration or trade or displacement carry them, that root calls them home in language, in values, in memory, in the stories that survive because they are told again and again until forgetting is no longer possible. Restoration over recognition is the choice to rebuild what was broken rather than to keep waiting for the same hands that caused the break to finally offer a word of approval. Because true dignity does not come from being noticed by the same systems that erased you. It comes from knowing your own worth and acting on it even when the world looks away. For centuries, Africa was drawn on maps as if it were empty. Its people were studied as if they had no history. Its inventions were stripped of names. Its knowledge was cataloged in foreign libraries, while its children were told they had no past to be proud of. Recognition from those powers came in fragments, always late, always partial, always tied to their benefit, never given freely or fully. And yet the heart of a people cannot live on scraps of acknowledgement. It needs the nourishment of its own truth. That is why restoration is a deeper, harder, but far more powerful path. Restoration means finding the broken stones of your story and laying them one by one to rebuild a foundation. It means teaching your own languages in your own schools, funding your own research, publishing your own archive, telling your children that their names have weight because they come from a line of thinkers, warriors, builders, poets, farmers, merchants who shaped the world long before their story was rewritten. Restoration is the decision to no longer beg for a seat at someone else's table, but to carve your own, with wood from your own forests, designs from your own symbols, rules from your own ancestors. The Igbo have lived this truth in many forms. After wars, after betrayal, after their commerce was strangled, they rebuilt, they traded again, they raised new generations with an eye for opportunity. They carried their markets, their crafts, their wisdom across regions that once tried to silence them. Recognition would have said, "You are finally equal because we say you are," but restoration says, "We have always been equal because we know who we are." In a world where praise is often given with one hand and taken with the other, where history books change with politics, where awards and apologies can be tools of distraction, restoration is the quiet and steady work that outlives the noise. It is the restoration of confidence when a child learns their people built roads before colonizers arrived. It is the restoration of value when an elder's story is recorded rather than forgotten. It is the restoration of economy when trade once controlled by outsiders flows again through local hands. It is the restoration of pride when young artists paint their ancestors not as victims but as vision. Recognition may come and go, but restoration plants itself in the soil and grows roots. Africa does not need the world to constantly validate its greatness. It needs to remember its greatness and act as though it never left. That is the essence of restoration over recognition, to stop asking, "Will they see us?" and to start declaring, "We will see ourselves clearly," and build from there. It is a call to the Igbo and to all who share the scars of erased history. Stop measuring your future by the willingness of former oppressors to admit the past. Measure it by your own ability to write the next chapter with tools you carve yourself, with songs you compose yourself, with bridges you build across the diaspora, with industries you own, with traditions you preserve, with innovations you create. The world may applaud or ignore, but restoration does not wait for applause. It works whether the room is silent or loud. It knows that a heritage restored becomes a heritage that no one can cheaply label or easily steal again. It is the long, patient, determined work of a people who have decided that the days of asking for permission to exist are over, and the days of standing on their own history as the ground beneath their feet have begun. Remembrance as a path to unity is not a shallow exercise of revisiting the past for its own sake. It is a deliberate journey into the very fabric of who a people are, so that the pieces that were torn apart can find each other again and form something stronger than what was broken. When a people remember, they light a fire in the dark corners of history that were kept hidden from them. They discover names that were replaced. They unearth traditions that were mocked. They reclaim stories that were told by strangers with agendas. And in that act, they begin to see that the borders separating them are not as deep as the roots connecting them. For the Igbo and for Africa as a whole, Remembrance is a bridge stretched across centuries of forced forgetting. It is the reason a descendant in the Caribbean can hear a drumbeat and feel something stir that they cannot explain. The reason a child in the Americas looks into their family tree and feels an echo when they find a name from the Niger. The reason a community in London or Brazil or South Africa feels an almost unspoken kinship when they gather around food, music, language, or shared pain that does not have to be explained because it is felt in the marrow of their bones. Remembrance does not create enemies, it reveals relatives. It does not deepen divisions, it heals them by showing the scars came from the same blade. Unity born of remembrance is not the unity of slogans, it is the unity of recognition that the same hands that drew artificial borders between tribes, that renamed rivers, that cut through lands with rulers and pens were the same hands that benefited from their division. When the Igbo remember their connection to other African peoples, when they see how their markets, their music, their migration patterns, their governance systems mirrored those of distant cousins, they stop seeing themselves as isolated victims of history and start seeing themselves as part of a grander narrative, a woven fabric that stretched across deserts, rainforests, coasts, and islands. This remembrance is powerful because it takes away the tools of manipulation that thrive on amnesia. Divide and rule could only work because people were taught to forget that their struggles were the same, their oppressors were often the same, their hopes were the same. Once remembrance settles in, the reasons for envy weaken, the excuses for conflict become harder to justify. The willingness to sell each other out diminishes, because one begins to feel that harming a neighbor is harming an uncle, that betraying a tribe is betraying a lineage that may one day call you home. Remembrance creates an invisible net, a sense of family that stretches beyond languages and flags, because it tells a truth deeper than colonial history, that before the ships, before the partitions, before the treaties, there was a continent that traded with itself, learned from itself, intermarried among itself, and shared spiritual and cultural rhythms that made it whole. Unity cannot be demanded by force. It grows when people see themselves in one another's reflection, and remembrance is the mirror. It tells the Igbo child in the diaspora that they are not alone. It tells the African on the continent that their brothers and sisters across the ocean carry the same ancestral songs. It tells the one who feels lost that the loss is temporary, because the memory has always been waiting to be stirred. This path to unity is slow because it is built not on politics but on truth, not on imposed alliances but on recovered bonds, not on fear of outsiders but on love of origin. It asks each person to learn a little more about their past, to share a little more with their neighbor, to see beyond accents and passports, to build markets that cross old colonial lines, to write literature that honors shared pain and shared triumph, to create art that carries the same symbols their ancestors once carved on wood and stone. Remembrance does not mean everyone becomes the same, it means everyone remembers they were never meant to be strangers. It means the Igbo can stand proudly in their heritage and still extend their hand to the Yoruba, to the Akan, to the Zulu, to the Ashanti, to the Fulani, to the ones whose ancestors walked similar roads. This is why remembrance is a path to unity, builds a future where diversity is not a weapon but a choir, where difference does not cancel kinship but enriches it, where the diaspora and the continent no longer look at each other through the lens of shame or suspicion, but through the lens of shared survival and potential. It is a unity born not of forgetting pain but of honoring it, not of erasing individuality but of weaving it back into the original cloth from which it was cut. And in that unity lies the power to face the world with strength, to write new chapters that do not repeat the old wounds, to stand together not because history was kind but because memory is stronger than division.